welcome to the Future Media podcast. We are finally in a court case where Meta is having to face up to the decisions it's made and the impacts that's had on users, more than 3 billion users worldwide. It's taken 1,031 days from the date that this investigation began for it to finally land in court. And today, I have the great pleasure of being joined by one of the mothers of one of the victims of Meta, Laurie Schott, who's joining me from Colorado. Laurie, hello.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me on, Ricky.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being so courageous. First of all, just for people who aren't aware, maybe you could just explain what happened to your family, please.
Exactly. We live in rural eastern Colorado. County has or the town has a population of about 120 people. It was a location that we decided to raise our family in because it felt safe. It was rural America to raise our children here. And what happened was that we have 3 children, and our youngest daughter received her first iPhone when she was 13 years old. And we had rules and oversight and things that we thought would protect her in place and checked her phone. And Annalie took her life November 15th of 2020. That was before Frances Hogan came forward and we understood the internal operations of Facebook and the platforms. And with that being said, our daughter also left journals that had content about how these social media platforms made her feel. So I guess what I am saying is that I was parenting in a world that I had no idea what I was up against. When people and I would research in the mental health profession were like, these platforms are good. They bring social connection, especially where we're in such a rural, isolated area. It was a constant battle with my daughter and I between her having that phone, what I thought was too much, and then what it was enough when we were working with, professional mental health counselors or anything down that line.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously I speak for everybody, so I'm very sorry that happened to you. But when bad things happen, you then have to wait for a good opportunity to do something about it. As I mentioned earlier on, it's been 1,000 days of investigation. More dozens of US states are combined. There's an enormous court case, over 5 million words of evidence, thousands of internal emails and documents are now being surfaced. And the world's finally getting a little bit of an insight into what the inside culture of Meta is. But the trial isn't necessarily exactly about what Meta does. It's about what it did with the information it had. Can you explain to people what this actual trial is about?
Our attorney general in Colorado is one of the 4 that was leading the charge. He was one of the first individuals that I shared Annalie's social media platforms with. And also I opened up her journals to him to see where she wrote about how social media impacted her. And, the whole thing is, it's kind of a 2-phase situation. They're talking about the aspect of harming children and parents not being aware and children not being aware of how these platforms designed, and at the same time addressing things like the Children Online Privacy Protection Act and things that would have protected children. So it's kind of a 2-phase mode, but they really understand, these AGs have put a lot of thought and time into this because they have seen the devastation that is hit. And I'm looking forward to how they present all the data on the used features that they have, like the like buttons and things that impacted, children like my daughter, and even how they misled the public, which I think is the most extreme.
Yes, I've interviewed Phil Weiser, who's your attorney general. Previously, he was also involved in the Google antitrust trials. I think you described him to me as your person.
He is my person. And, Ricky, and this is the thing, I have advocated in DC. I have talked to more legislators than I'd ever want to in my lifetime. My attorney general was the first person I did not have to beg to listen to our story and to take action. So for that, it shows the power of what we're fighting for in DC and to get our message across. But to be in the court situation, it's a level playing field. To me, it's finally like, this is a level playing field. The parents are walking in, the AGs are walking in. It's a court of law. It's not like what we're dealing with in Washington, D.C., sadly.
Kelly Stonelake, who's one of the Meta whistleblowers, who I've had lots of conversations with, put it really beautifully. She said that the way the world has been up to now is it's basically a billionaire against a teenager in their bedroom. And you take it to court, and as you say, it becomes a level playing field, right?
Yes. And, you as parents, you think you do everything right. You think you had, you were on a level playing field. But for me to open up and see what my daughter saw within the design content of her platforms was, to me, I guess I was naive in that world of trying to understand what these platforms are about, but we didn't have access to understand what they were about. And to understand that we're up against the most powerful and richest company in the world, but we're not backing down. And I'm up for the fight, because our children matter. And that is what is taking really a lot of traction within the media and the stories, because parents are being able to relate to this now that they understand how these platforms work, now that they understand, the internal documents that came through the court. It just drives the point home with so much more power of what we were up against as parents and are up against.
So you got to be in the court. You were in the antechamber to the court. You could see Meta's lawyers face to face. You could see them there in court. You were surrounded by people who have also suffered, and you were surrounded by more of your people, if you want to put it like that. What was it like? Can you explain it? And what was the scene like?
We had held a press conference in front of the courthouse, and the trial had already started. We didn't want to have any conflict with us having impressions on the jurors. So we ended up doing our press conference while the jurors were secure inside and the public was inside mostly. And doing that was a powerful moment. But after that was done, we were able to walk in that courthouse. And for me, I'm a visual, as all these other mothers that have lost their children. They wanted to see where this was taking place. They wanted to see what the inside of the courtroom looked like. And they wanted to see Meta's attorneys. One attorney specifically was an attorney that was in LA. So I wanted to make sure that he saw me. And some of the other parents did too when he walked out in the hallway, because we wanted our presence to be seen and our children to be recognized in that moment in time.
And so it's an interesting angle in this court case that Meta's lawyers are being funded by Meta itself, because Meta's insurers have won their own court case to argue that they shouldn't have to defend Meta for actions they took knowingly. And they've lost that case. And so these lawyers, and I can only imagine they're very expensive. Did they look expensive to you?
Very expensive.
Right. And so Meta's having to pay for this themselves. And that's got to be starting to worry Meta's shareholders, because ultimately Meta reports to its shareholders. What did you make of their legal team? I mean, and what's his name, the lead lawyer? Remind me.
Paul Schmidt is the one that we not connected with, but we saw in action when we were in LA. And again, when we saw him walking into this courtroom, it's like, okay, to me, in the situation I'm at, and I know it's hard not to be, tilted to one side. I just think they seem very cold. They're very automated. They're the same answers they were giving in LA. And I think that emotional chip is not even there. Is what we had with the connection with the jurors and the groups that were in LA. It's a different feeling.
The LA trial, give everybody just a quick refresher on what that was.
The Los Angeles trial was against a child, KGM, and it basically was, she is, thank goodness, still with us. It was a trial about how these platforms, Meta and Google, impacted her mental health, and rolling it back all through her age when she was young, and how it evolved over time, and how she still struggles with the emotional impact of those platforms today, her self-confidence, her anxiety. The outcome of that trial was, to me, shocking because I think we have felt like we had lost so many times in DC with trying to get legislation passed, that coming into that scene where you sat in the hallway of that courtroom waiting 9 days for that verdict to be read was an emotional roller coaster. And I didn't have much faith, I think, just because some of us as parents felt we'd been beaten up, by not being able to get our message and get legislation passed. But when that verdict was read, it was a validation for all of our children. It was a validation that we're on the right path, and it was a validation to keep fighting.
Let's think about that timeline for a moment. Maybe this will give you some comfort. So the US government under the FTC brought a court case against Meta, arguing that it was a monopoly in social media and should be broken up, and that WhatsApp and Instagram, which were both acquisitions and rivals at the time, Meta bought both of those, and then the government waved it through. And Meta made a whole series of promises about the fact that they wouldn't be able to collate the data together and create one composite audience that they could sell advertising against. They made all of those commitments, and then they did exactly that. And it went to court, and the FTC fought for those companies to be broken up, and Meta won that court case. And so to your point, all of that pushing in DC suddenly feels like it was all for nothing.
It does.
But then there's still an appeal taking place on that, okay? So now the FTC feels that that was the wrong decision, and there's an appeal taking place. So then it rolls on to New Mexico, and New Mexico brings a case against Meta, very similar to the LA case, looking at, the way that the algorithm was created, and the algorithm was what caused the problem. And so by creating the algorithm, they've been reckless in doing so, and Meta lost that case. And so suddenly you have a loss, and Meta's obviously appealing that. Then it rolls forward to LA, and LA has the case, okay? And a lot of the same evidence is being used again. A lot of the evidence from Frances Horgan's evidence that she was the whistleblower that took data and gave it to Congress and gave it to the Senate. And then you see that evidence come out, and then they lose that case. And that's known as a bellwether case. Do you want to just explain what that means?
In our situation, I think, with us as parents, we have filed lawsuits against Meta. There are so many of us, they have congregated them into two courts, one, the multi-district court up in Oakland, where we're at right now, and the other one, the JCCP, where a lot of the parents and the school districts, I think, court cases were being heard. So with the bellwether, it has to do with the sheep herder, and the sheep at being the lead. And that's basically what it is to take a snapshot of the conglomeration of all those cases that are piled together or coordinated together to have those cases go forward and see how the law of the land traces.
That's right. So you investigate on one case, first of all, to see if that holds. And then there are 3,000 or more other cases sitting behind it, plus cases brought by, I can't remember the exact number, but it's significantly more than half of all America's schools are also taking an action saying that they can't teach in an environment where social media is stealing the attention of children in class. And so this can't be underestimated. This is vast. So you've now got a case in New Mexico that says the algorithm is harmful and you did it on purpose. You were reckless, actually, is the word. You were reckless to do that. Then you have the bellwether case with one complainant in LA where they're found again to be liable. That then leads forward to, okay, there's now 3,000 people that are going to bring cases, and half or more of American schools are also going to bring cases. And now we're in this trial in Oakland, California. Now you've been there. Tell me about the scene. Tell me about, what's it like?
It's just like any other court case or, courtroom or courthouse that there is. There's a lot of attention on this right now. At the same time, we have the Tennessee Attorney General in the middle of a court case also, kind of like, so you have these things kind of running simultaneously, like we did in LA. We had the New Mexico case going. But when you walk into that courtroom, you just see the power and the passion. I see the passion in the attorney generals. I see the passion in the legal team that is there. I remember them when we were doing the press conference, we could look up at the floor where the hearing was being done. And I think they were on break. They couldn't hear us or anything, but they were looking down at us as parents. And that was a powerful moment to say that our children matter and that people are listening and the world is listening to what happened, and that we are saying enough is enough. I am so thankful for the attorney generals all across the United States that have stepped up for this, because even when I started with trying to tell honest story, it was so hard because people were looking at me like that didn't really happen. And I was trying to explain what her journal said, but you couldn't connect it. And now parents that are looking at it from the outside in now, and with all the proof and the documents that have come out and the emails that have come out between Mark Zuckerberg and Masario and Meta and even Google, you know, how these platforms are designed, are starting to step back and go, I see it. And it's been a long 4 years. It's been painful. But I'm just thankful that we were in the LA court rather than the case being dismissed, or the Oakland court, and the case wasn't dismissed.
I want to ask you about two last things. The first thing is that I was listening to the opening of Meta's defense, and that lawyer you were talking about, he said the most astonishing thing at the start. He said something along the lines of, I am aware that you as people in this court are going to hear terrible things that happen inside Meta, and there are loose words, was his word, you know, in internal emails with staff laughing about, hey, look, we're basically pushers. Look how addicted people are to IG, yeah, to Instagram shorthand. You know, he said, you know, and all these things are going to happen. And it looks really awful. And then he just basically said, no, right, that's what happened. But the case actually isn't about that. The case is about proving that it is a medical issue that Meta causes, and you have to prove that's true. You have to prove there is a medical link between Meta's products and harm to children, and that simply doesn't exist. So you're not going to be able to prove that. And then you also have to prove that we knew that it caused harm and we kept it from the public. So this case is actually a product description case, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It is a product description case along every line. But what other tactics do they have? I mean, this is how they're attacking it. They tried to attack it that same way in Los Angeles. But in the end, I know that the jurors in this case serve as advisors to the judge. That is a different, you know, environment than what we had.
Can I stop you there and ask you to explain that? Because that was my next question. So there is a jury. Could you see the jury from where you were?
When I peeked in the window, I could see a few of them, but that was about it.
So tell me how this jury thing works, because it's unlike anything I've ever heard of before.
I am with you, Ricky. I didn't know until I was at the courthouse, and basically they serve as an advisory to the judge is the way I understand it. So I think the dialogue will go back and forth between how the jury is basically taking in this information and looking at the evidence and things, and then passing that on to a very powerful judge.
And let's end with her. So tell me about her, because she is something of a legend.
Yes, that's what I hear from everyone. Everyone says they're in fear of her, but she runs a very strict, tight, fair courtroom. And that's what we need in this. And, you know, out here, a bunch of cowboys say no BS. Well, I kind of say the same thing. I think she's a judge that's not going to take any of the BS on this. And, you know, it's going to be what it is. But I just have faith that all these children in heaven are marching along with us, and that the courts are going to see the light of day, and we're going to win this one too.
So this judge, let's just end here, because we spoke just before you came on air with me, Laurie, about the fact that I'm a firm believer that journalism is about people. Okay. And every story has to be about people. Otherwise, why are we bothering to cover it? Everybody will feel empathy towards you and the situation that's been happening for you. But we can't actually make decisions about people unless we have people who are courageous enough to stand up, to be human. This judge, honestly, I follow a lot of these cases, and I followed a lot of judges over many decades. What's fascinating about her is she is solid on the law, but she is really solid on the people as well. So let me give you two examples. You may know these already. So the court has asked Mark Zuckerberg to appear before the court, and his lawyers haven't committed to him appearing or not appearing. It's kind of in the ether at the moment. And this has happened to her before. And the last time this happened, they said they're very busy. They can't keep turning up for these courts. And she just pointed at the door and said, I expect them to come through that door. Okay. Love that. Love that. That's kind of like, I want this to happen, but not in legalese. It's something everyone can understand. But perhaps my favorite example of her fearlessness was, I don't know if you know this, but the OpenAI founder, okay, and Elon Musk were arguing over the future of OpenAI and whether it should be a profit or not for profit. So you've got Sam Altman and Elon Musk in the court as two tech bros basically bickering with each other. And she wasn't having a bar of that. And at one point, one of the judges, one of the lawyers said something, and Elon Musk interrupted from his seat and made a comment. And she made him stand up and walk over to the jury and say to the jurors, to their faces, I am not a lawyer.
Yeah, I love that. We need that. I mean, when you have the power, and like I said, they think they're untouchable. And I did say that in one of my statements in front of the courthouse, that they are touchable. They are, and she's going to make sure of it. That judge is going to make sure of it. And all we ask for is a day in court. And with her at the helm and the way this is structured and the power of the AGs, I have to have a lot of faith that this is going to keep continuing to push and to make the world a safer place for our kids online. They deserve it. All these children that we have lost. You know, we did a huge banner in front of the LA courthouse to honor children that we knew had died. And I think there was like upwards of 300 names on there. Youngest child was 8 years old, died of a choking challenge. And this time when we brought that handmade banner to this courthouse and unrolled it in front of this courthouse, we had to add almost 40 names of children that have died since we were in LA. And that's unexcusable. So we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to show up. And I know in my heart, when Mark Zuckerberg is there, if I have to sleep outside the courthouse again, like I did in LA, I want to be in that courtroom when he testifies. I want him to see us as parents.
Laurie, I tell you to be strong, but I don't need to. I think it's coming out of your every pore. You're amazing. Thank you so much. Let's check in again as the trial continues, but thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Ricky. You're a treasure. Thank you.